Anthony Perkins names the gay leading men of old Hollywood he fell for in secret, and wait till you hear which legendary cowboy star tops his list. The shocking confession that never made it to the tabloids will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden age. Picture the glittering marquees of 1950s Hollywood Boulevard, a facade as carefully constructed as the film sets behind studio gates. Facades were everything in this era, where leading men lived double lives crafted with more precision than their on-screen performances. Anthony Perkins, the lanky, intense star who would forever be associated with the shower scene that changed cinema, navigated this world with a knife-edge balance of public perfection and private passion. Can you imagine living every moment under such suffocating scrutiny? Today we pull back the velvet curtain on the whispered confessions Perkins shared only with his closest confidants. Revelations that would have destroyed careers had they leaked to the gossip columns that lined drugstore shelves from coast to coast. Anthony Perkins entered the world on April 4, 1932 in New York City, born into theatrical royalty as the son of stage and screen actor Osgood Perkins. The shadow of his father's success loomed large, a crushing weight made heavier when Osgood died suddenly of a heart attack when Anthony was just 5 years old. This earth-shattering loss carved deep grooves into the boy's psyche, creating a lifetime pattern of seeking father figures among powerful men who could offer both professional guidance and personal connection. Growing up in a sprawling Manhattan apartment filled with his late father's theatrical memorabilia, young Tony, as friends called him, developed an intense, almost obsessive fascination with movies. Neighbors recall the serious-faced child slipping into darkness of local theaters, sometimes watching the same picture 3 or 4 times in succession, studying the masculine swagger of actors like Gary Cooper and James Stewart with analytical precision. His mother, Janet Rain Perkins, encouraged his artistic sensibilities while simultaneously pushing him toward the Ivy League respectability she believed would protect him from the volatile uncertainties of show business. But the siren call of performance proved irresistible. After a politely endured stint at Columbia University, Perkins abandoned academia and plunged headlong into the theatrical world his father had inhabited. His tall, angular frame and those impossibly deep, haunted eyes caught the attention of directors immediately. There was something different about Perkins, a nervous energy, a palpable vulnerability rarely seen in the square-jawed leading men of the era. This unique quality landed him his first Broadway role at 22, and, within months, Hollywood came calling. The camera loved Anthony Perkins in a way that studio executives found both intriguing and perplexing. Here was a leading man who radiated intelligence rather than brute strength, sensitivity instead of swagger. His breakthrough film role came in 1953's The Actress, but it was his Oscar-nominated performance in 1956's Friendly Persuasion opposite the legendary Gary Cooper that catapulted him into the stratosphere of Hollywood fame. The irony of this career-making partnership with Cooper would reveal itself only years later in whispered confessions to intimate friends. By the late 1950s, Perkins had established himself as one of the most promising young actors in the business. Studio publicity departments crafted a carefully curated public image. The shy intellectual bachelor married to his craft, too busy studying scripts to pursue romance. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Perkins was desperately trying to reconcile his hidden desires with the crushing expectations of a deeply homophobic industry. Desperate attempts at self-correction included sessions with psychoanalysts and a string of highly publicized dates with Hollywood starlets that fooled absolutely no one within the industry's inner circles. The turning point in Perkins' career, and perhaps the point of no return in his private struggles, came when Alfred Hitchcock cast him as the mild-mannered, mother-obsessed Norman Bates in 1960's Psycho. The character's fractured psyche and repressed nature hit uncomfortably close to home for the actor, who later admitted to friends that Norman's tortured double life felt like holding up a terrifying mirror to his own carefully compartmentalized existence. The film's unprecedented success trapped Perkins in a golden cage of typecasting from which he would never fully escape. The 1960s brought both professional frustration and personal awakening for Perkins. Seeking escape from Hollywood's suffocating spotlight, he fled to Europe, where more progressive attitudes allowed him brief glimpses of authentic living. In Paris, Rome, and London, away from the ever-present threat of career-destroying gossip, Perkins cautiously explored relationships with men, some famous, some not, always maintaining plausible deniability should whispers reach American shores. French filmmaker François Truffaut, who directed Perkins in The Champagne Murders, later recalled the actor's palpable relief at being in environments where his authentic self could occasionally emerge from behind the carefully constructed facade. Back in America, the constant vigilance took its toll. Colleagues from this period describe a man consumed by anxiety, chain-smoking through interviews, deflecting personal questions with self-deprecating humor or vague philosophical musings. Tab Hunter, another closeted star of the era who briefly dated Perkins, later wrote of their shared paranoia. "We couldn't even risk being seen at the same restaurant twice in a row. The level of calculation required for simple human connection was soul-crushing." By the early 1970s, with shifting cultural attitudes offering tentative hope for greater acceptance, Perkins made a shocking decision that baffled many who knew his true nature. He married photographer Barry Berenson in 1973, with whom he would have 2 sons. The marriage, by all accounts, including Barry's own later statements, contained genuine affection and partnership. Yet close friends maintain that Perkins never fully abandoned his other life, maintaining discreet relationships with men throughout his marriage. Arrangements reportedly navigated with Barry's tacit understanding. The 1980s brought career resurgence with the Psycho sequels, and for a moment, it seemed Perkins had achieved the impossible. A stable family life, renewed professional success, and carefully managed private fulfillment. Then came the devastating diagnosis. In 1990, Perkins learned he had contracted HIV, news he kept secret from all but his closest circle. Even in illness, the lifetime habit of hiding remained. He crafted elaborate cover stories for his declining health, blaming his increasingly gaunt appearance on intensive method acting preparation. As his condition worsened, something shifted in Perkins. Friends describe a man making peace with his divided life, sorting through memories and seemingly unburdening himself of secrets long kept. It was during these final months that Perkins allegedly compiled what one friend called his heart's true resume, a private accounting of the relationships that had meant the most to him throughout his life. Relationships that would have generated screaming headlines had they been known during the golden age of Hollywood. On September 12, 1992, Anthony Perkins died from AIDS-related pneumonia at age 60. In a final act of public persona management, his publicist announced he had died from brain cancer, though Perkins had prepared a posthumous statement acknowledging his AIDS diagnosis, which was released after his death. Even in his final moments, the dance between public image and private truth continued. All those battles, all that hiding, all the years of calculated risk and careful deception carved a list of names into his memory. Names he finally shared with a trusted few before the end came. In his final year, as mortality stripped away pretense, Perkins opened the locked diary of his heart. Here are the 8 leading men of old Hollywood he confessed to having fallen for, relationships that ranged from brief, passionate encounters to years-long love affairs conducted in the shadows of cinema's golden age. Rock Hudson. The first time Anthony Perkins encountered Rock Hudson at a private pool party in the Hollywood Hills, he reportedly froze mid-conversation, Struck by the surreal symmetry of their situations, both were rising stars with carefully manufactured public images. Both were living elaborate lies orchestrated by studio publicity departments, and both were terrified of the same career-ending exposure. Their affair, conducted through a Byzantine system of mutual friends and coded phone messages, lasted nearly 8 months during 1956. A relationship Hudson's longtime housekeeper would later describe as the only time Mr. Hudson seemed truly relaxed in his own home. "We were like two drowning men clutching at each other," Perkins allegedly confided to playwright Edward Albee years later. "Neither of us strong enough to save the other, but for a moment we could stop pretending we weren't underwater." The relationship ended when Hudson's agent caught wind of their increasingly risky behavior. But the next name on Perkins' list would prove an even more dangerous liaison, with a star whose cowboy image made him the very definition of American masculinity. Montgomery Clift. Their first encounter came during a Broadway casting call where a still unknown Perkins watched mesmerized as the already famous Clift commanded the room with his intensity and haunted vulnerability. What began as mentorship evolved into a storm-tossed affair that crew members claim continued sporadically across 3 different film productions. Clift's destructive spiral following his disfiguring 1956 car accident coincided with some of Perkins's most desperate periods of self-loathing, creating a volatile cocktail of passion and mutual self-destruction that studio fixers worked overtime to keep contained. "Monty taught me that beauty and torment were 2 sides of the same coin," Perkins reportedly told his therapist. "We recognized in each other the same hollow space where contentment should have lived." Their final meeting in 1965, just months before Clift's death, left Perkins shaken for weeks. But even this tumultuous connection paled against the forbidden intensity of his attachment to one of Hollywood's most celebrated method actors, James Dean. The legendary rebel and the tightly wound Perkins collided like chemical elements during a 1955 Actors Studio workshop, igniting an instant incendiary attraction that studio head Jack Warner personally intervened to suppress when whispers reached his office. Fellow actors recalled the electricity between them during the handful of industry events where they risked being seen together, with director Nicholas Ray later claiming he deliberately kept them apart during casting for Rebel Without a Cause, precisely because their chemistry was too raw, too revealing. "Jimmy lived at full volume while I was still learning to whisper my truth," Perkins confessed to columnist Shirley Eder in a never-published interview discovered after her death. "His courage terrified and thrilled me in equal measure." Their connection was severed by Dean's tragic death, leaving Perkins with unanswered questions and unresolved feelings, a pattern that would repeat with his next infatuation, a screen icon whose masculine image concealed surprising tenderness. Marlon Brando. During pre-production meetings for a film that would ultimately collapse in financing, Perkins and Brando spent 3 intoxicating weeks developing their characters in adjoining bungalows at the Chateau Marmont. An arrangement studio insiders claim was deliberately orchestrated by a director aware of their mutual attraction. Their brief but intense connection was characterized by intellectual sparring matches that invariably evolved into physical expression, with Brando's legendary sexual fluidity providing a temporary safe harbor for Perkins's more conflicted desires. Marlon didn't believe in categories or labels, Perkins reportedly told composer Leonard Bernstein at a cocktail party years later. "He moved through the world as purely himself, a freedom I could sample but never fully claim." The pair drifted apart as Brando's mercurial nature turned toward other pursuits, leaving Perkins heartbroken but ultimately leading him toward a more enduring connection with a screen legend who became his most significant relationship. Tab Hunter. What began as a publicity department's nightmare, 2 contracted leading men spotted too often in each other's company, evolved into Hollywood's most open secret, a relationship spanning nearly 3 years that somehow survived despite being conducted in plain sight beneath a thin veneer of bachelor roommates sharing expenses. Their complementary public images, Hunter's golden boy wholesomeness and Perkins' intellectual intensity, created a smokescreen that allowed them momentary domestic bliss in Perkins' Laurel Canyon home, where friends claimed they lived as close to openly as the era permitted. With Tab, I could almost imagine a life without hiding, Perkins confided to costume designer Edith Head while filming Psycho. For the first time, I understood what I was giving up by choosing my career over my truth. Their relationship ended when career demands forced them to separate coasts. But the memory of this closest approach to authentic living haunted Perkins for decades. Unlike his brief but complicated dalliance with one of cinema's most revered leading men, Paul Newman. During the filming of 1956's The Rack, Perkins and Newman developed what crew members described as an unusually intense rehearsal relationship that extended well beyond working hours, with marathon script analysis sessions in Newman's trailer that frequently continued until dawn. The relationship remained ambiguous. Newman, married but known within inner circles for his flexible boundaries, never fully committed, yet never fully pulled away, creating an exquisite torture for the deeply infatuated Perkins. Paul existed in the space between friendship and romance, Perkins reportedly told director Gus Van Sant decades later. He offered enough to keep hope alive, but never enough to demand decision. I lived for months on the crumbs of his attention. The emotional entanglement faded as Newman's marriage to Joanne Woodward solidified, leaving Perkins with bittersweet memories, but not as bittersweet as his unrequited longing for an iconic Western star. Gary Cooper. In what friends describe as the most emotionally complex of his attachments, Perkins developed an overwhelming infatuation with Cooper during the filming of Friendly Persuasion, transferring years of father-loss yearning onto his distinguished co-star who was nearly 30 years his senior. Cooper, whose own carefully hidden private life included numerous same-sex relationships according to multiple Hollywood biographers, recognized Perkins' vulnerability, but maintained professional boundaries throughout filming, earning both Perkins' respect and intensifying his longing. Working with Coop was like standing too close to a fire, Perkins confessed in a journal entry shared by his widow years after his death. The warmth was life-giving, but I risked destruction if I moved any closer. Perkins' fixation on Cooper lasted years beyond their professional collaboration, fueling complex emotions that would eventually find partial resolution in his relationship with the final and most surprising name on his list, Clint Eastwood. In the most shocking of his revelations, Perkins claimed a brief but intense connection with the rising star Eastwood during a 1968 European Film Festival, where both were promoting separate projects away from Hollywood's watchful eyes. What began as casual conversation at the festival's opening night gala evolved over 3 champagne-fueled nights into what Perkins described as an exploration of curiosity on Eastwood's part. An interlude both actors immediately compartmentalized upon returning to American soil. Clint approached everything, even that, with the same unflinching directness he brought to his performances, Perkins allegedly told his Psycho co-star, John Gavin. No pretense, no promises, no shame, and absolutely no discussion afterward. The encounter remained a closely guarded secret, known to only Perkins' most trusted confidants, a final example of the shadow lives led by Hollywood's golden age stars, forever caught between public adoration and private authenticity. Anthony Perkins lived and died in an era of transition, too late for the absolute secrecy of Hollywood's earliest stars, too early for the relative openness possible today. His story, and the stories of the men whose lives intersected with his, reveal the cruel paradox at the heart of Hollywood's golden age. These were men paid to portray the full spectrum of human emotion while being forced to deny their own emotional truths. The revelation of Perkins's private attachments doesn't diminish his legacy. It completes it, adding depth and humanity to a man long defined by his most famous character's fractured psyche. In the years since Perkins's death, Hollywood's relationship with LGBTQ+ actors has evolved, though many would argue not quickly or completely enough. When we look back at the elaborate deceptions required of stars like Perkins, Hudson, and Hunter, we glimpse the tremendous psychological toll exacted by a system that demanded authentic emotion on camera while prohibiting authentic living off-screen. Authentic is precisely what these performances continue to feel like decades later. Perhaps because the greatest acting these men did was not for the cameras, but for the columnists, the fans, and the studio executives who controlled their fates. What would Anthony Perkins make of today's Hollywood? We can only speculate. But as we rewatch his performances with this fuller understanding of the man behind them, new layers of meaning emerge in every frame. The subtle communication of someone who spent a lifetime speaking one truth through his art, while being forced to live another truth in silence. Perhaps that is his most enduring legacy. Performances so rich with subtext that they continue to reveal new dimensions, even as the full picture of the man himself comes into clearer focus. Which of these revelations surprised you most? Drop a comment below sharing which Hollywood legend you'd never have suspected, or share your thoughts on how the industry's atmosphere of secrecy affected the performances we still celebrate today. If you found this glimpse behind Hollywood's carefully constructed facades fascinating, hit subscribe for more untold stories from cinema's golden age. Tomorrow we'll reveal the secret Hollywood power broker who arranged marriages for dozens of stars, including 3 names on today's list.